Hi guys, I'm getting ready to head out in a minute. I've just finished like a huge epic class with my students, and we were just finishing off the very last tutorial for the underworld, because there's 7 stages of um, an ascension when you're a creative empath, and we've been on the underworld tutorial since about the end of November, I think. So that's us finished the underworld tutorial, and now we're on the air to ether stage of the ascension. And we got talking about Ouija boards and seances, and I was telling them how it works. And I thought, well, this might be a great opportunity for me to make a little video, get you used to doing my little on-air podcast that I want to do with my girls. And when we're out on the road recording our shows in America, I want to get myself a male co-host so we can do our own little sort of unexplained mystery sort of, unsolved murders, sort of that kind of thing. Do a little podcast together, just him and I. So I'm trying to get you used to my voice, because I'm more comfortable on radio than I am TV. I'm a radio girl, so I've always, I had a little radio show in Chicago briefly as well. So I'm a radio girl, so I'm more comfortable with you hearing my voice. So, and yes, I know that's a spider web there, and it's dirty, but you never ever remove spider webs from your room unless you were ready to clear the entire room when you're doing a cleanse of the entire room. All the stuff that you see caught on there, all the dust and that, like how First Nations people have dream catchers. Well, for me, as a high priestess, that's what spider webs do for me. They catch all the negative energy, all the bad thoughts, all the they also let you know when you're being watched, because spiders are the totem for surveillance. And yeah, so you don't ever remove them. They have to fall off themselves, or if you're going to remove it, it has to be because you're cleansing the entire room. Otherwise they fall off when they're ready. But yeah, so to me, spider webs are just like how First Nations people use dream catchers. So I'm not being lazy. There's a reason for it. So back to Ouija boards and seances. So Ouija boards, Ouija is yes, no in French, and they were actually parlour games. They were originally invented like Monopoly. You sat around and you played it for fun. It was like a game, a parlour game, and somehow it just turned into, somebody got the idea of them thinking that they were communicating with the dead, when in actual fact you don't communicate with the dead when you use an Ouija board. How Ouija boards work is, I have this argument with people all the time, because they say to me, but if it's not the dead that talk to us when we use the planchette, then how come I knew the name of, or how come the name of my great-great-great-grandfather came out, but I didn't know who he was in real life? Like, I didn't know him, but there he was saying, he's great-great-granddad Jack, and I didn't know who he was until I asked my mum. And my answer is always the same. The reason why his name came up, because if you look at the way that our brain has the capacity to manifest the most incredible things, like, as I keep saying over and over again with Descartes, I think therefore I am. You manifest what you create. So you're sitting around this planchette expecting the dead to come through, and what happens is you get the tempters instead. Now, the tempters are like the Grim Reaper. They're neither good nor bad. They're just there to tempt your fate, test your faith and tempt your fate. So they kind of like the devil in disguise. They're like, they play devil's advocate. That's a great way to explain it. So they come in and they will do things to tempt you, to see whether whether your heart is virtuous or impure, whether you have psychological imbalances or whether you are pure. The tempters come in to test that, and they will put things in your path to see how you will react to it, to see whether you are more on the light side of vibration or more on the dark side of vibration. And they will come through in tempting situations like seances and Ouija boards to see where your faith lies. These sessions that people have where it's always demonic and these people are being possessed, and you'll notice as well on YouTube, it's always people in the sort of 14 to about 25, 26 year age spectrum. That's because that's when we're at our most powerful, what I call psychologically. When we're at our most powerful is when we're sort of going through puberty, because our brain's changing and our hormones are changing, and that affects the chemicals in a way that become unrecognizable to us once we kind of step out of childhood and into adulthood. You know, we go through the puberty phase, which is like the cocoon phase, and just like with a butterfly, the brain changes. The caterpillar goes from like the larva to the caterpillar to the butterfly. Well, we go from birth would be the baby, the caterpillar would be the childhood years, the cocoon is the puberty years, and then the butterfly is the adult years. And so puberty is when you're going through that cocoon stage, just like the caterpillar does, and everything breaks down chemically, like on a molecular level, and their frequency is at its most fragile pitch. So that's why they are the ones who have the higher propensity to create or experience paranormal activity, especially poltergeist and perceived demonic possession. So you'll see a lot of these people having these seances and doing these Ouija boards on the YouTube and that, and getting possessed and taken over. And it's not because it's the dead, because the dead don't do that. The dead can't communicate with us that way. It's impossible. If the dead were able to communicate with us that way, there would be no electricity in the state, let alone in the house, because the amount of energy that is required for the dead to be able to communicate with us. It is easier for our loved ones to communicate with us when we are asleep, when we're unconscious, when we're daydreaming. You know, if you're a creative empath, that when you're in the zone, you know, when you're in that flow state and you can't put the pen down or you can't put the paintbrush down, and that when you're in the zone, they communicate with you then. But as well, that's the only way we can communicate with them, is that because they are reincarnated the second they die. You know, the light that you see when you cross over is the light of creation, as well as, you know, them crossing over into the light. When they cross over into the light, they cross over into becoming new life. So you're reincarnated the second you die. So it's like, how can I explain it? It's like have you ever, say when you were at school, if you've ever sort of been bored in class and you kind of zone out and you'll kind of wander off into this whole imagination world of your own, you might start doodling on your school book, or you might just sort of drift off, and then your teacher will come and talk to you and snap you out of it, and you kind of, you know, snap out of it. That's you in the creation frequency. And when you're in that, you know, because we physically can only stand that frequency for short amounts of time, the dead can only communicate with us in that frequency. And because it's always such short bursts amount of time, because it's physically painful for the living to withstand that frequency, it can only be the dead and like children in that who can withstand that frequency. Animals and nature, the 3 keys of evolution. And so we have to be asleep, or they have to be asleep. The best time to communicate with the people who have died are within the first 9 to 12 months after they die, because they are in the womb of their new mother, and, you know, up to 3 months old when they're born, and they will still have that connection to the life that they had before they got the new one. So the best time to have those communications with them without any hindrances is sort of within the 12 months after they die. In my culture, in the Māori culture, when people die and we have their tangi, we bring their body home for 3 days and we have 3 days to mourn their passing. And then we have a year to grieve, and it's like the first 3 days of their death, we bring them home, and it's like we are preparing them for their transition. And then it's like we give everyone a year to the day that they died to get used to their passing. And then once we've accepted their passing, we unveil their headstone a year to the day that they died. And so how we grieve is, I always think that Māori people just have the most beautiful way of grieving, but we understand that we have that time to communicate with them and get used to having that departure from them, energetically, because it's a lot to understand, and it's grief is a lot to take on board. But we also understand that we see them in our dreams, and that they're there in our thoughts, and that, which is why we do so much to remember them in that first year of death. Hang on, I'm going to sneeze. But the thing is, the only way we can communicate with them is when we are both on that same frequency. It's not possible for them to come through otherwise without it causing an energetic disruption. Usually when you are about to have an encounter with a loved one who has crossed over, your body will react to it biomagnetically, which is why when your body reacts to that rise in vibration within your biometric frequency, which is like your outer frequency, your outer energetic territory that surrounds your body when you move, your hair will stand up on end, and you get goosebumps and you'll get shivers down your spine. That's when you know that there's been a change in the pitch and frequency to something higher, because your body reacts to it, because we physically can't withstand it for too long, so your body reacts. And then, hang on, I've got to sneeze again, sorry. So they need to get the energy from somewhere, because they know that if they drain it from you too much, you're going to be like an empty vessel, and then they won't even be able to communicate with you in your dreams. Because even if you don't remember your dreams, I guarantee you they're with us there as well. We always meet in the frequency. Everybody who's ever lived and died meets in that frequency every time where one of us is asleep. So they have to get the energy from somewhere, so they take it from, they have to gather it from the nearest energy source around them, which will be like lights and electronic equipment and stuff like that. But again, these kind of occurrences are very, very rare, and they can also be occurrences that we can create ourselves, depending on our state of physical, psychological balance. The lower the balance, the more kinetic energy we will create. And that's how the planchette moves, is through kinetic energy. So they don't come through that way. And if they came through using Ouija boards, there would be no electricity in the state. They would have to gather so much energy in order to communicate, to move these boards around, the planchettes and the glass and that, and take over these people in order to communicate, that they would have to drain like an entire state, pretty much. In the very least, like a town or like a city or something, just like Ghostbusters. Like the energy has to come from somewhere. So they prefer to talk to us in our dreams, and when we, go zone off and daydream, and when we're unconscious and in comas and stuff. So it's not the dead that come through. And when people say, but how did I know that my great-great-great-grandfather's name was Jack? And it's because of this. Your genetics, your DNA remembers that it is related to your great-great-great-grandfather Jack. You might not remember that you are, but your DNA does. And so it will pull him through you in order to be able to identify who he is by the tempters, because of the fact that the glass is moving without you having to put any energy, or the planchette or whatever it is you're using as a planchette, that is using kinetic energy, which is a lower frequency. You're moving the glass using negative energy. There's a lot of ion particles in the atmosphere, and that is negative, and that is it pulls you down, and that's why they get possessed, because the tempters, because they have like fallen for the ruse in thinking that it was Granddad Jack, and so they continue talking and open up that connection. They pull through darker energies, and that's why they get possessed. But it's not that they're being possessed by demons and devils and dark energies that sit around waiting for you to open them. You manifest what you create. So when you see these people being possessed after doing seances and using Ouija boards on YouTube, it's because they've manifested their worst nightmare. When you are under demonic possession, or you have what you think are demons and negative spirits around you, if it hasn't been someone in the house who has manifested it that you're reacting to, you manifest your own worst nightmare. Nobody knows how to scare you more than you do. So you manifest the thing that terrifies you the most, because the dark side know exactly what to do in order to bring the worst out in you. And that's what Ouija boards do. They are a test to see whether you are gullible and can be tempted by the devil into the dark, or whether you are pure of heart and say, I'm not doing this, I want no part of it. We all experiment, though. We've all done it. I don't know anyone that hasn't tried to use like a seance, to do a seance, or using a Ouija board. I know it sucks, because I know a lot of people like to take part in these things, but you've got to understand how dangerous they are. When you understand that you're not actually communicating with the dead, you know these things, and these things come through because they are there in your memory somewhere. You have to remember that the brain remembers everything that it learns from the second it's created until the second it stops. It remembers everything it learns and only throws out the stuff that it doesn't need anymore, like false realities, or like we don't need to relearn how to walk, so it will throw out the memory of how to learn to walk. We don't need to learn how to write, so it will throw out the memory of, when we learned to write, that sort of thing. It only remembers the stuff that it needs to in order to raise your frequency and vibration, and it dumps the stuff that it doesn't need, which is stuff that we just don't need to remember. We don't need to remember when we were conceived, and the first time we used the potty and things like that, so those memories kind of get dumped. If you remember them, it's because there's a specific reason for it. You only remember what you're supposed to in order to help you function and evolve into a higher energetic being. And so you may have been 6 months old, sitting on the floor, playing with your toys, hearing your parents in another room talking to aunties and that about great-great-great-great-great-grandfather Jack doing this, that, and the other thing. And even though you don't remember it, your brain remembers hearing it. And so when you are in that position to be able to open up that communication with the tempters, they will bring through people that you couldn't possibly remember the name of, in order to make you believe that you are contacting the dead, when in actual fact you are walking yourself to the gates of the underworld. So don't use Ouija boards. They are in the earliest, most ancient form. They were actually like with tarot cards. They were a training tool for oracles. And then they became, that's why they were board games. They were parlor games, because like in the ancient days, they were actually kind of used as training tools for oracles, so that you could tune your frequency in and out of the light and dark frequencies. Because when you're an oracle, like high priestesses and shamans and high priests and warlocks are oracles. Seers as well, and sages, we're oracles. And in order to be able to be an oracle, we need to be able to see both the light and the dark. So these tools were used as children to tune you in to the light and dark frequency, so that you would get used to having to be a shapeshifter, because you've got to change constantly, depending on who you're around and what you're around, because you can't possibly know what it is you're going to see or experience, or what you're going to be called to do when you're around people. So you have to know how to change and turn on a dime, depending on whether you've come across someone who's of a higher frequency or lower frequency, because gatekeepers as well have to stop people of the darker vibrations from accessing the light, which is why Ouija boards and that the tempters come in to test your limits as to how much virtue and vice you have psychologically, to see whether you are allowed past the gates. Because if you use Ouija boards and do seances and that, it means that you will never be allowed to have access to the creation frequency, because they are of a lower frequency in order to be able to access them, and the creation frequency can't be reached from the underworld. It's physically impossible for the underworld to reach the creation frequency. And when you're dealing with the underworld like that, which is what the tempters are, because they're the ones that hand you over to the devil, who then takes over with the vices like drug addiction, abuse, um, when you're violent, alcohol abuse, fetishism, addictions, violent but negative behaviour like murder and abuse, and hurting people and hurting animals, and that when you're starting to go down that road, because that's what happens next. If they can pull you in with thinking you can communicate with the dead, and that, they will pull you down further and further and further, because they're there to keep testing your faith and tempting your fate. You tempt the hand of fate. That's why they're called the tempters, because they are there to tempt the hand of fate. They will let you believe whatever it is you need to believe, to test to see whether you are of the light or dark persuasion, energetically speaking. And if you are of the dark persuasion, if you show any sign of weakness like that, they will keep drawing you in and drawing you in until you're handed over to the devil, until you either then have to have an ascension to be saved, or that's when you are given over to addictions and suicide and depression and murder and violence, and all the negative stuff that takes you to Satan. Because you don't meet Satan without meeting the devil first, because Satan doesn't get his hands dirty on the small things. He will only come and take over when it is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, he lets the devil do the dirty work. Just like how Jesus will save you and take you to the light of God, the light of creation where God is. The devil does the same for Satan. So then by that point, if you don't find God and find salvation, and step over to the light to save yourself from the temptations of the dark side, then you end up in the underworld, and you will inevitably live out the rest of your life in absolute suffering until you die. And then when you do, that's when you have to pay up with Satan. That's when you would, whatever you believe, your version of hell is non-existence, the black hole, hell, whatever. Just feel the God and afterlife experience in where necessary. I'm just saying it because it's easier to explain it this way for the majority of people to understand what I'm talking about. I was walking down that path and I got called for my ascension, and I took the call, and now I help others know how to receive the call in order to save them as well. So I just thought I'd explain how Ouija boards and seances work. As I keep saying to people and over again, all you have to do to connect with the people that you've loved and lost is remember them, because that feeling you get when you start remembering their face or that experience or that moment, and they feel like they're there with you, and you have that smile on your face and in your heart, that's them letting you know that they're right there with you in that memory. And it's like I keep saying, memories are just time jumps and short bursts. So I hope that helped. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Don't be afraid. Everyone's going to give this stuff a try, but just be careful what you believe, because Satan gets blamed for a lot, and the dead get accused of a lot, when in actual fact it's all under our control. If you're using kinetic energy, which is energy that pushes out, if you're around any energy where it's pushing out away from your body, that's kinetic energy, and that's a lower frequency. You have your biomagnetic frequency, which is the energy, like atomic energy, that is around your body's parameter that moves everywhere you move. And then you have your biometric frequency, which is the energy between that barrier and your head, around your head, where basically it tunes into your pineal gland, or your pineal gland tunes into this biometric frequency that is the energy between you and this outer perimeter, that kind of swirls around your head, and it's like a radio transmitter. And that's how we're able to project sound and vision, is because depending on the frequency of our pineal gland, and the pitch, like the satellite transmission between your pineal gland and the energy that's swirling around your head, in conjunction with the energy that's swirling around your outer body and the planet and the universe, you pick up frequencies and signals, and then you are able to project them, which is why you'll get the sound of feet running across ceilings, and you'll hear knocking and hear your name being called, and occurrences like that. That's all been created and manifested through the mind. If it's not a time jump, a time slip, or a time bend, then it's been manifested by people who have either lived in the house or who are currently in the premises at the time. So what I do, being of Egyptian ancestor bloodline, being a high priestess, is that I am able to tune into people's biometric and biomagnetic frequencies to raise their vibration and pull them out of that darkness, which is what I do when people are having their ascensions, when they're in that underworld stage and they're full of that depression, and their bodies are falling apart and they can't get out of that darkness, and they're having dark thoughts, and there's that contemplation of like insanity or fear of insanity and suicide and that sort of thing. That's when I get sent into people's lives in order to pull them out and raise their vibration, and I do that by tampering with their biomagnetic and biometric frequency, and I go into their psychological mind and like reset their, what I call their binary code, and I find the glitch in their matrix, and I reset the code and fix it and tidy their little energy bubbles up, and then they live longer and they become healthier and happier and find their bliss. And that's what I do basically, and that's because I'm an occult scientist, so I understand how energy works in my language. I can't do maths, so I had to figure this out in my language, and so I know this stuff. I've studied it for over 40 years. My entire life I've been studying this science of mine. I didn't know it was going to become a science, but now that I understand it, I'm using it to help other people so that they can avoid inviting this kind of negativity and negative frequency around them, because people need to understand that it is 99.9% of the reason why our world is as bad as what it is today, because our poor little planet is absorbing so much of this kind of negative behavior. She can't take it, and it's coming back as like natural disasters and wars amongst countries, and so I hope that helped. It was a bit of a long video today, but if you need it, it's going to be there for those who need it, and I am only there for those who need it. I'm not here to try and convert or convince anyone of anything. I'm just here, just doing my little thing, doing what I love, teaching what I love, and I'm letting other people kind of join in on the information. You don't have to believe anything I say. I'm not here to force my views or opinions on anyone. I'm just sharing what I know for those who are interested to hear other people's points of view, or for those who actually need to understand it, because it's going to help them figure stuff out and deal with what it is that they're dealing with in their homes and businesses and properties and in their personal lives. So that's what I do. So anyway, I just thought I'd share this with you, and be well, and know that I love you, and ka kite anō.